Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of odd song structures, unusual song structures. I don't know. My brain just really blanked out there. We're going to be checking out a band called Sumac. Sumac? Something like that. Today with the track The Task. This is a 21.5 minute epic, so pause the video, grab a snack, get some water, stay hydrated, and we'll see what's going on with this. Okay, so a lot of this, there's no accent, there's no pulse. I can feel the tempo, but not the time signature. See, now we're getting some landmarks. Just a massive low-end presence as well. It's just a very large sounds. And so we're in 4/4, and this part is the most solidified by it, but I'm pretty sure every section prior has also been in 4/4. Yeah, so they were at that higher tension for a long time. I predicted they were going to come back down to the resolved tone. They did it later than I expected, but so a variation on the last idea we heard. That's kind of fun on the drums. We have a pedal tone and somebody else moving between three notes. Dun, 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 dun. The way that the sound ping-pongs to the other side. That triplet idea in the bass providing some sense of movement. Please tell me they're gonna... Yes, thank you. Interesting use of microtonality. I'm not quite sure if they're utilizing string bends or actually playing with the tuning knobs. It sounds like tuning knobs to my ears. That's wildly inefficient, but achieves a very specific sound. That also kind of leans into the lack of tonality in that section towards the ends. A couple of the strings, or maybe just one of the strings, was so slightly out of tune. Not enough to really throw it off in the dissonance, but to induce a warble. Interesting phrasing. More of that. It's almost like a destruction, like media destruction going on. It's an interesting texture to add. I do love the drums' continued usage of odd accent patterns. The drums are massive here. I mean, the snare cracks and just reverberates to both sides. It's massive production. And I was talking about earlier, just the gnarliness of the bass. Here we hear it on full display, even if it is palm muted. I feel like there's a lot of potential in this idea. The big, booming, large metal bass and drum with clean lines on top of it and a lot of silence. I'm not connecting with this execution though. Like, even the kill switch on the clean guitar is a neat idea. It's a merger of the electric nature of it and the cleaner, closer to acoustic sound. It's a cool aspect of a section that just isn't working for me. You know what a lot of this would work well with, though? And I hate to say this about music that's created for music's sake, is part of a multimedia project, though. I would love to hear something like this, the latter half of this anyways, on loop at an art installation. Yeah, get my articles mixed up. Dude's got a gnarly voice though. So this is obviously not a track that I think works well under intense scrutiny, at least from a technical angle. I will be digging into a couple of technical ideas that I appreciated throughout here, but it's really just a song that dives into the emotional qualities of each of its sections and how those emotional qualities tell a story. For instance, our opening 6 minutes or so was primarily focused on single note ideas. It was a lot of aggression, repetition. There was a lack of uh, what did I say? Landmarks. It was difficult to tell the phrasing other than the introduction to the phrase. It was just the same note being hit with the same intensity. There was no pulse. There was no phrasing to the smaller ideas. It just kind of existed in repetition. Eventually, we did see some breakaways from this, where one guitar would stay on a pedal note and continue this idea, while the other one would play three notes. Rise up, come down, rise up, come down. But a lot of it focused around single note repetition. We did have a vamping chord idea a little bit where we would have a more stable note that we would do our rhythmic idea over and a more tense note that we would do our rhythmic idea over. And they would play around moving between the two of them with varying degrees of speed. For instance, the first time our higher tense note came in, I expected them to come down about 8 bars before they did. Whereas when we came back to this section, we were bouncing between the two notes every 4 bars, I think. Variation on the idea, but the idea is still the same. Stick to one note, play around with it rhythmically, move to a different chord, play around with it rhythmically, then come back down. And that pretty much sums up the first 6 minutes. Now, granted, there are a lot of riffs in there, probably close to 7 or 8 maybe, but they're all based on the same idea. I wouldn't say that any of them explored something different, whether it was technical or emotional. It was this single-minded drive to showcase, well, yeah, it was a showcase of a single-minded focus. Just this dedicated, one foot in front of the other, keep moving, keep progressing, who cares, just keep moving on kind of concept, with one task in mind, which is where that single note idea comes from. We move from this into a moment of silence, followed by a very quickly moved away from semi-melodic moment. I think it was a full 8, 16 bars maybe, single guitar, clean, use of kill switch on held out notes, and very sparsely played. We move into our atmospheric metal section after this. We get the distortion back up, and the guitars are playing these suspended notes, creating this moody atmosphere. We go through a couple of different variations on this, but it is primarily about crafting atmosphere through dyads. We've moved away from the single note ideas that we had at the beginning, and we have these melodic ideas. Granted, they're primarily composed of whole notes and half notes. We are actually holding things out rather than looking at shorter, more abrupt note lengths. But we're moving between notes. We have melodic flow going on here. After this part, we enter into the end game, the last half of the album, or sorry, the last half of the song, which is the extended 10-minute, I think, sparse section, the guitar duet with the very slow doom drums and the palm muted bass. This is very melancholic, but in a heavy-handed way. We have the booming drums, the snare hits, and the crack reverberates out to the sides. The bass feels like a caged animal. It has so much power and distortion and volume behind it, and the only reason it feels small at all is because of the palm muting. But every time we get one of those chucks, we strike the string that's muted, it sounds huge, almost like a bark, more so than a bass hit. And we exist in this for quite some time. We play around with dissonance in our two guitars. Sometimes they're more on the melodic side, sometimes they're not. There's a lot of use of silence in here as well. It's very somber, very isolating. And we end it with our growling over chords. Again, bringing back to the isolation of it all. We've lost everything that kind of makes the song up, and now we just have this anger, this rage in our vocalist. To me, this tells the story of a difficult task that someone doesn't want to do, but someone must do. At least that's what I get from the title. To put it into something very cinematic, and where my brain specifically was listening to this, it is the story of somebody who must kill someone they do not. They block out all emotion from it and make it about the task itself, because any emotion would bring in self-doubt, it would bring in hurdles, it would bring in a difficulty to complete said task. As soon as the task is over, though, we are left with the emotion flooding in, which is the isolation, the grief, the sorrow that this has happened. The task is over. I'd say that the idea of the task itself takes up very little of this track. The majority of it is the aftermath, is what it feels like to me, and the emotional turmoil of this person who has accomplished this task they did not want to do and is now overflowing with the regret and pain and sorrow of having completed this task that was not in their best interest. That's what it feels like to me. I don't know if that's what it's about, but that's what I got out of it. It takes a long time to do this, though. Does the song earn its 21-minute length? I don't know. And it's not really a question up to me to decide, but from my own bias, I don't know. There's definitely multiple parts in here where I felt bored. Specifically the latter half. I don't know if we needed to wallow in that drum bass guitar duet idea for as long as we did. But if the point of the song is to overwhelm the listener with that emotion, especially as a payoff, a payoff to the intensity in the first 8 minutes of the track, it exceptionally exceeds. It is 100% a work of art at that point. I do not see this as a song that is something I would casually listen to, ever. Not just because the emotions and story I got out of it are not things I tend to like to explore on my own, just on a whim, but also just because it sits in very simple ideas for extended periods of time that I'm not a big fan of. But as a work of art, I cannot deny that this does what it does exceptionally well and achieves things in a way that could not have been achieved if they had gone a different route. So I still, like I said, don't know if it's earned it. As far as artwork, sure. Casual music, maybe not so much. But I'm sure there's also people who love to listen to this casually, and I'm just not the general audience for it. I did say there were some technical things in here that I really appreciated, and I want to dig into that real quick before we hit the lyrics. First of all, the first 6 minutes are a series of riffs that are based on a varying amount of 1 to 3 notes, and that is it. With heavy usage of lacking emphasized beats and heavy usage of very short repetitions. Some of them are 1 beat repetitions, some of them are 2 beat repetitions. It is wild to think that a riff gets repeated more than once a bar. It is a very short idea indeed, but it absolutely works in the moment. I do think some of these riffs got taken a bit too far. There's only so many times I can hear the same 1 beat idea before I am personally bored. But the idea that they've built so many of these short ideas and connected them in a way that felt cohesive and not entirely too simple, despite the overall simplicity of the ideas, is a feat upon itself. It is not easy to make simplicity not boring. And I have a pretty high tolerance for it, so it's expected that I was going to get a little bored of it, especially in this context, critically thinking, really digging into what they're doing. I'm sure casually it doesn't hit that wall, that hurdle as quickly, but it's still something that I think a lot of people, extreme repetition, especially like this, people are going to hit a wall and be like, okay, I've had enough of that. Um, and I think that they do a pretty good job of walking that line, of really coming up to that wall and veering left and doing something different. Um, and to keep it all exciting as well. They do that with the production and the vibe and the atmosphere and different things the drums might do to change things up. That it's little changes that allow it to feel just different enough that it keeps people interested. At least that's my guess. Again, I've only listened to this in my own brain, my own ears, so I don't know how other people react to it, but I mean, it was suggested, so there's at least one fan of it out there. I'm sure there's more. So that's pretty neat upon itself. Drumming. There's so many points where the drummer chooses odd rhythmic syncopation, where the accented beats are not really ever where I expect them, or where the drummer will lead with 2 or 3 expected strikes and then do a series of unexpected accents to just play around with the phrasing. Phrasing is actually something that comes up so often in this track that I find it difficult to really nail down time signatures. I have a hunch the whole song is in 4/4, but there are some places where the accented beats get so bonkers and unexpected, and there's just a series of bar after bar after bar after bar of no landmarks that I really don't know what time signature we're in. The idea is that I can just count all the bars in the larger phrase where I can finally feel a repetition and say, oh, that's 24 beats, or that's 28 beats, or that's 32 beats. We can divide that by 4 and get a series of bars, and now we're in 4/4, right? But there was very few parts where I'm like, this is definitely 4/4. I can tell just by these 2 bars. So there's a lot of really interesting playing around with phrases and polyrhythmic ideas that the drummer introduces a majority of the time. So that's pretty cool. The bass tone I would kind of touched on, but geez, it is just massive. It is not even a fat bass tone. This is just powerful. This is something that I don't think you could carry into very many other projects and it not feel out of place, but in this style, it is perfect. It is like earth personified into music and is the foundation of the song. It feels like an enormous ground that the song can be built on top of at times. It is monstrous to think of. And it pairs well with the vocals, which are gnarly and huge as well. We get a very clear hearing of them in the final minute or two of the song, and it is just, jeez, it is just such a big tone. And some of that's going to be EQ as well, but you can hear all the natural elements, the natural fry and crackle and all that coming from the vocals as well. And there's just so much power for the producer to work with there that I really don't think there's a lot of extra work done on the production to really bring it out. It's really just about adding some extra oomph to it to give it the power that it needs for the isolation. Any instrument, I don't care what you're playing, is going to need a little bit of extra oomph when it's the only thing, unless you're going for something simplified. If you're going for a somber piano line, yeah, you're going to want that to be a bit lighter and quieter. But for rock, metal, especially if you're going for isolated like this, it's going to need some production work to boom it up. So I'm not saying that as a slight against the vocalist. Uh, there's a lot of production work that goes on vocals all across the board. There are very few songs out there with pure raw vocal recordings. But yeah, even in that situation, you're going to need a little bit of extra work. Unless you're like maybe an operatic singer and you just have that booming projection. That would be one case where you probably don't need to add much. Anyways, I'm getting a bit off topic. Let's hit some lyrics. 20-minute song, 6 stanzas. It will never cease to get a chuckle out of me. Just the vast difference in lyrical contribution between metal and, say, pop or folk, where they will cram, 2 poems worth of words, or hip hop especially, into like 3 minutes, and metal's like 21 minutes. Yeah, we'll put a few lines in. That should be enough. The music will carry the rest of it. All right. What has, will, and can be seen feeds at root in crimson pools. Through all these binding waters flow by channels interwoven. So everything that has and will happen feeds at root in crimson pools. Begins from pools of blood, begins from death, and all of these pools are interwoven and work together. So all of humanity's, actually all of the world's death is uh what is it? Catalyst to all the other actions in the world? Is that what it's saying, right? It is a very convoluted way to say that. But it's also a very visually intriguing way to go about it. Without a fear of severance, when horizon sun beheads, would leave endless days of drought and dust to keen through our hollow husks. In pillar made of flesh and bone, in repose and undisturbed, would rot our hearts unwrung, hears unwrung. Maybe that's a typo, maybe it's supposed to be hearts. Through clouds are licked by flame from the fiery tongues of man unhinged, ruin that sought may bury be by all bodies in love entwined. Risk our hands in others held. To be seen, stripped and raw under threat of rending blows. The task of souls imbued with light risk our hands in others held. Yeah, I have no idea. This is very visually interesting, but drenched in, I don't even want to say metaphor. It seems straightforward, but it's dancing around the topic in a lot of places, using very flowery language to land upon it. I mean, even the first stanza, which is the only one that I even have an inkling of a thought of what it might be about, directly states what it's saying, but it uses such language that kind of obscures its meaning a bit if you're not looking through the language in a sense. Um, those are my thoughts. I'm going to get this blinding face out of this video. Those are my thoughts on Sumac's The Task. This is where you guys come in. Hit me up with your thoughts and comments on this. If you enjoyed it or not, anything that stood out to you, anything you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on, put it in the comments. Above that, if you could head into the description box, there's a link for Linktree. Takes you to this menu right here, has links to everything related to the channel. You can find ways to support the channel as well as join the Discord community, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell, I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, we have a special selection for today as well. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.